You are watching the number one podcast in the whole entire YouTube wrestling community, and I'm one of your hosts, Juan.
And I'm your other host, Jean-Paul Leek.
And together we are
Break.
And like we always promise to bring the best content in professional wrestling. This is why we follow up in the series of like extra videos that we've done, right, Jean-Paul? And one of like the biggest things that we've done is cover like every single one of the interviews that the Stone Cold Steve Austin Broken Cold Sessions brings. So Jean-Paul told me, he's like, hey son, the king is in the Broken Cold Sessions now. I'm like, who the fuck's the king? Oh, the King Lawler. All right. So let's do this episode. We're going to be talking about this. I think it was a good interview. I think that we got to learn a little bit more of the king. Stuff that, like, at least for me, I didn't know. So
yeah, because the king.
I like about these interviews. Let's go with Jean-Paul.
The king is, like you said, we've heard him on commentary for years, but like we didn't really know that much about him unless you follow the old school wrestling and stuff. But even then, this interview, you really got to find out a lot of his personality and even some of the acting and stuff he did, and his hobbies like the drawing. I didn't know he did the drawings, and he was really good at it. So that's awesome because he actually went to school for that. He was like, I'll be like a cartoonist that I'll draw for Marvel or DC Comics.
DC Comics, like he wanted to do Batman, Superman. He wanted to, like, pretty much that was his living.
Yeah, so this episode
to professional wrestling.
This episode I think was just cool because it was like it was just like fun. It wasn't like where Goldberg was like, oh, look at me, I'm so legit, and like Undertaker we all admire. Not that we don't admire the king, but we're just like, oh, okay, puppies,
Oh yeah. This is what we were thinking about, right there. That's great, JR, but did you see those puppies? So we got to see the origin of the word. We got to like experience all of that. So thank you so very much for being with us one more time. Thank you for all the love, support, for all the comments that we get, subscriptions. Thank you, family, in all the social media platforms. Don't forget to watch the AEW All Out review. Jean-Paul and myself, we covered that. Jean-Paul, like a lot of not known confirming reports about Matt Hardy. Brian Albert said, look, he's legit, he's good, he's going to the hospital, he's coming out of the hospital, he's fine. Revy, right away, she's like, oh, I didn't know that he spoke to you, or I didn't know that you talked to me or Matt about this, so why are you reporting this? So a lot of things on that. John Moxley said he'll defend the AEW Championship anywhere. He would like to defend it in New Japan, in Impact, on Ring of Honor. So a lot of things that are coming out of All Out, so it was cool. Don't forget to check that out. Jean-Paul and myself were not really pleased with the ending of the main event. Or Glenn Davidson was. We want to shout him out, but we were not, because pretty much we wanted to see a new AEW champion. But like Jean-Paul says, John Moxley is like the John Cena or the Roman Reigns of AEW, so he will not drop that title or that strap anytime soon. So Jean-Paul, let's start from the beginnings of the King Lawler, like you said. So we find out that he liked to draw. And that's how he gets exposed to the WWE. He was drawing wrestlers, right? That was the beginning.
Yeah, I guess he would send in the pictures. I forget which territory he said, but he would
Memphis.
Memphis. Yeah, he send them in, and they'd be like, "Oh, look at this fan who drew pictures of the wrestlers," and then I guess they had a good response, so he kept drawing them, and they brought him in, and then that's kind of how he said he got his foot in the door. Because, like I said, that's what he actually went to college for. Because he wanted to draw comics and stuff, and they actually showed some of his drawings, and they were, really good.
Oh yeah, no, I really like especially the one from Superman. That was a really cool drawing that he did, and I mean, he was a talented man. He said, but when it comes to wrestling, he didn't really have much of training. He didn't do much. He pretty much actually, like you said, he was invited by one of the old school figures in the Memphis area. So that's why he's like, hey, you want to hang out with us, and you want to draw, and then he actually got his own spot where he could actually. Because this guy had a club. He has got a club, so people will go there and dance and all of that. And then the king was doing the drawings. Kind of designing a little bit how the club was going to look like. Then he was invited to be in a radio show. And then in the radio show, kind of not wrestlers per se, will come and be like, hey, you mind plugging us in? We would like to do some kind of wrestling the words is commercials and stuff like that. And that's how the king got the foot in the door. And then he got has his first matches right here. See, Jean-Paul is we're talking about the 70s, around that. So you see that the king, I will not say he was one of the greatest wrestlers ever, but he was able to put on a great gimmick, and also he defended that territory, because we're gonna go back to the territory times, and you remember that, Jean-Paul, when the wrestlers would actually not being able to go from territory to territory. they will become popular in one territory, and then kind of like they will go to other territories. But like the King, I really enjoy how like he was telling like all these rivalries that he had. Bob Van Winkle, he had a rivalry with Mr. Perfect. He had a rivalry with Terry Funk. See, that was like the first.
Oh
big break
because they asked, because Stone Cold said, like, 2020, all this craziness with COVID, the empty arenas. He's like, well, a little something about empty arenas shows, and then they went to that match with Terry Funk, which was it was legit because Terry Funk, he sold it good, especially the ending. But like they said, they didn't know what to do because, like you said, the King's not the greatest wrestler. He's good, but he feeds off the crowd, and there was no crowd there, so he was like, what do we do? And then Terry kind of led it, but with Terry, see, he's all kayfabe, so you don't know like what's a shoot, what's a work, like, because at the end they said when his eye was like, oh, my eye, it's done, they kind of just looked. He's like, I looked at the ref looked at me, we're both like, and then they just called it.
Like, what do we do? But like it was like because he got like a pointy thing, right? And then he ended up like I don't think he completely hit Terry Funk, but like Terry Funk sold it like it did in his eye.
Yeah, he kicked something. Terry had something in his hand and he kicked it, and then it went out like his hand went up and hit him in the eye.
Yeah, well, I think it was a table. It was like a table that he broke and like a piece of it. He got a piece and he was going to attack the King with it, and then he went like that, but like the King dodged it, and then he actually went in his eye, but like then Terry Funk sold it, oh my eye, and you can hear it, and like my eye, like my eye.
Yeah, that's so, like, he sold it. Yeah, so it's like
it was good, and that's like the first exposures to an empty arena matches, but also like he mentioned like how good Terry Funk was when it comes to improvise. He's like, hey, I really had a really great time with him because you never know what he was gonna do.
Yeah, he said that's actually his favorite opponent.
Yeah, Terry Funk.
Out of everybody who he ever wrestled, he's like, oh, Terry Funk's, my favorite. And I like when he said he was getting in the business, and like the real wrestlers, they called up and they're like, oh, we're going to stretch these guys, we're going to kill them. And then Terry's like, no, please. No, and they're like, no, they're just ribbing you, just calm down.
Yeah, like they were down, they're just messing with you. It's like, stop doing those, because he said he put a commercial together. He said because he was working at a radio station, then he get the sound noises, he get like, the boys like to make it a little deeper and more like loud and all of that, and then he put like a whole like a commercial announcing like his match. So like it's like, oh, don't be doing that anymore, and then what will you take for you to just start in our promotion? And the King pretty much becomes the King of Memphis. Now that's what it is, because I know the King from that time because of like the feud that he had with Macho Man Randy Savage, because they was very close to that. And then remember in actually the Randy Savage biopic, or like in like the documentary WWE has, he mentions that this whole rivalry with the King. He said that they were fighting for Memphis, and like he said, Randy was kind of a little difficult to work with at the beginning, but once we got like a few matches, under our belts, then we actually enjoyed it, and Randy always like intense and all of that. So like he did mention a little bit of that. He mentioned, like I said, Mr. Perfect. I really like that part with Mr. Perfect, because he actually got the title from Mr. Perfect, and they showed that.
Yeah.
The AEWA Championship, like, and that was like before Kurt Hennig going to the WWE, that was his biggest accomplishment. That was the AEWA champion. Although in a bullshit way, remember that Jean Paul did like a catapult, Mr. Perfect hit like the turnbuckle, and done.
But see, that's when people like, that just shows you the times. Like when people hit moves like that, the crowd believed it, that it was real. Now when people get hit with moves like that, everybody's like, oh, okay, where's the, the huge German suplex into a table?
Yeah, like you said, like, that we're talking about, like, what, 40 years ago?
Yeah.
Where, like, a move like that, it will be done. Right now it's actually a move that sets up for another big move. But, like,
exactly.
that was cool to, like, see how, like, the King was able to become that big figure in Memphis, and he pretty much dominated that whole territory. And that's what catapults him to actually be recognized by Andy Kaufman. That was a big comedian. I'm not wanting to be known as a comedian, but ended up being a comedian. And then they had this, like, one of the first, I would say, storylines that involved, like, pop culture and big exposure from media and TV at that time. And that's how, like, the King is able to actually stretch that feud with Andy Kaufman. They had a match. They show that. And, like, and he pretty much, like, kind of, like, in the interview, he mentions how, like, he told, I'm going to do this to you, I'm going to do that. So he actually goes in depth of what he was going to do to Andy Kaufman. Did you like that part? I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, and they really went into the story, like Andy Kaufman would only wrestle women, and then so the crowd would hate him, because he's like, oh, I'm not going to step in there with a man, because, like, then I'll get my ass kicked, and then, then there'll be no heat on me. But then he's like, oh, well, let's do the match, him against Lawler. And of course, Lawler just beat the shit out of him, pretty much broke his neck. So then that's why they were on who was it, David Letterman?
David Letterman.
Yeah.
They went to Letterman.
Yeah, that's when they were on there. And like he said, it was all a work. It was like, his neck was fine and everything. That's why, because like he said, oh, he's fine, but he's like, oh, he wants an ambulance to make it look like you really broke his neck.
Oh, remember,
He's like, I'm not paying for a $350 ambulance. So then the ref's like, oh, he's not paying. And then Andy's like, I'll pay it. Then he goes to Jerry and he's like, Andy said he'll pay. And he's like, call an ambulance. Because they wanted to make it look that believable.
And also, like, after that, Jean-Paul, he spent, like, with the neck brace, he spent, 5-6 days with that because he was selling the injury. So, like, he said that, like, Andy Kaufman was a professional wrestling fan, which he idolized Buddy Rogers. Nature Boy, the original Nature Boy. Not Ric Flair, but the guy that, Ric Flair took the gimmick and the name from, the Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers. And that's Jean-Paul, that's one of, the first WWE champions. Is Buddy Rogers. Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers. So he get that gimmick and he know how to sell. He was really invested, and that tells you how much professional wrestling, for people that are not really familiar with this, how much professional wrestling is in the pop culture, or in everything, in acting, in everything you do. You can always do a professional wrestling.
And it was so good because, like he said, they went through that script. Okay, you're going to say this, I'm going to say this, I'm going to slap you, and then it's going to keep going. But he's like, Andy Kaufman just kept dragging it. And even Letterman was like, what's going on? Like, nobody knew what was going on. So the King just got up and slapped him.
Yeah.
And then, everything from there was, they just had to trust each other and go with it. But, Letterman was like, so...
He said that, that was the only time throughout his, tenure doing the show. Because it was a really long time. Because he just dropped the show, 3-4 years ago?
Yeah.
And then Jimmy Fallon, I think, he took over him.
Yeah.
It was Jimmy Fallon, or I think it was John Oliver, or one of those guys, one of those comedians. But he said that that was the only time that he felt that he lost control over his own show. So that was really cool. And like I said, that's one of as far as done in my research, Jean-Paul, that's one of the first times that actually wrestling had a big break through pop culture. Meaning oh, okay, there's the wrestlers are actually on national TV exposure, because wrestling was kind of an underworld. You like this? It was a subculture. It was
what did it come from? It came from the circus.
Yes.
It came from people wrestling at the circus and the sideshows, for lack of a better term, and then it evolved into a sport. So it was always an underground thing, like you said. And so anytime there's mainstream exposure, like the King said, let me get a rub off this. Let me get some money, some popularity, and it led him into acting, and stuff too.
Well, like you said, that's the main thing. Is the King and these people were kind of the pioneers, you will say, because they were able to merge pop culture and national media, national TV with professional wrestling. So that was really cool. And that, like you said, because of all of this big thing that made news throughout that day, 73, 74, during those years, when Jim Carrey, I think if I'm not mistaken, Jean-Paul, is 1999. When they do the movie about the life of Andy Kaufman, Man in the Moon, REM is actually, they have the soundtrack for that, and it's called The Great Beyond. For the ones, there you go, that's my pop culture reference right there. The Great Beyond is the main song of the soundtrack. So they have the King in the movie. So that was good. And right there, you can see the picture with Jim Carrey. We see Jim Ross right there also. We see the cat. We're going to talk a little bit about the cat before. But they had this really bad relationship. They didn't get along. Jim Carrey was trying to channel Andy Kaufman, and he wasn't acting proper. But there's a lot of rumors that Jim Carrey was never he's never been fun to deal with. Right, Jean-Paul?
Oh yeah, he's one of those actors who, like they said, he's a method actor. So when you get really that in depth into all your characters, it's you're gonna be a little crazy in the brain trying to live all those different lives, But I like when the King said, "Didn't anybody tell him that the thing?"
Yeah, we were best friends.
Yeah, he's like, it was a work. He's like, we got along. It wasn't a shoot. He didn't actually hate me.
Yeah.
But, and then he went over that one scene where Jerry forgot his lines, and he's like, his big pause, and then the King kind of reminded him. He's like, "Oh, well, don't you mean?" And then he's like, "So."
Yep, and then he actually went and got a bit of a tantrum. He screamed, and then in the video, he's like,
"You just calm down."
He does that all the time. But even by the one thing, the big statement that the King does in this part of the interview, Jean-Paul, he says, "I don't think he did justice what Andy Kaufman was."
Yeah,
and it is the truth, because that movie completely flopped. Aside of Danny DeVito, aside of this thing with the King, they have also Courtney Love as Andy Kaufman's wife. So I don't think it did any good. Like I think that what they were aiming for, I don't think Jim Carrey was able to put it on on the movie. He wasn't able to
Well,
like
like they
channel
said,
any
what did they say? He was the 800-pound gorilla. He
Yes.
was the biggest attraction, the biggest star of that time. Coming off all his hit movies, and he's being a comedian and stuff. So it was they probably put him in that movie just because of his fame, not because he was the right guy for it.
Yeah, I think Jim Carrey's a great actor, but like in all of this, like you said, great actors, like guys that like do this method of acting, or like at least they have like those kind of craziness inside of them.
Yeah.
I don't think that like he's able to do like a biopic of somebody else.
No.
Like in this case, Andy Kaufman, a guy that like was considered a comedian for everybody, but he didn't want it to be considered a comedian. That tells you a lot. But like outside of this movie, Jim Carrey has got a lot of great movies for me. The Mask is one of them.
Oh,
Me,
Mask
Myself,
is
and
legit.
Irene.
Yep.
Me, Myself, and Irene is legit. He has like Ace Ventura. Ace Ventura is good. Liar, 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 I think. And also like Confession. I think it's like it's the one with Kane Winslet that is like inside of the mind or something. That's it when he plays like a serious character. So Jim Carrey is able to do these things, but not like playing somebody else. I think that like because we know how Andy Kaufman was, but good. Mm-hmm. I think that this part of the interview was pretty interesting. But see, now we go Jean Paul to like the part where like he actually didn't like his WrestleMania moment. He wasn't happy that he got a WrestleMania moment, but he actually didn't like how the match turned out to be, and I can understand why, because really a match with Michael Cole. You couldn't give him anything else.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And then we'll touch on this, and then go back to like when he said, I was here for how many years? I could have had a WrestleMania match, but yeah, the match was long. They had Stone Cold out there, Jake Hager, Jack Swagger, whatever. They had all them guys out there, and it's like, it just made the match. Did anybody care? No. Yeah, you were just like, why?
Yeah, this pretty much like you said, it like turned out to be one of the worst matches in WrestleMania history. Because actually the King wins, right, Jean Paul? He wins that match. He beats Michael Cole. But then, remember the days when, like, there was, like, the mysterious GM. Like, he would talk to the computer and all of that. Then, actually, he starts typing or he sent a message, and he reversed the decision, and they gave the win to Michael Cole. So, it was just that Mania 27 is not a good Mania. Aside of The Undertaker against Triple H, and The Rock coming back as, like, the host of WrestleMania, to me, that's the only thing that it was good. Because the main event is John Cena against The Miz. Not good. CM Punk and Randy Orton was good. Yeah, and Randy Orton got the win, but Randy Orton goes as babyface. So, of course, they did a big spot jump. CM Punk, like, diving from the top rope. And then, of course, RKO and that. So, I think the King deserved a lot better because he got a good feud with Bret Hart, remember?
Yeah, exactly. After the King of the Ring and stuff, yeah, that was a good feud. Of course, then there was the controversy. Then it was Shawn Michaels and the Knights and everything. But, it was good, and like he said, he was there for how long, and he was on commentary because one night it was like, Randy was supposed to be on commentary, and, Nitro was on an hour before them, and they're like, oh, let's see what's on Nitro. Ooh,
well, like, he goes, like, Vince goes to him, is like, hey, King, can you go get Randy? I need to go over with him something about the schedule, or, like, how the show's gonna go, and like you said, they turn on Nitro, and, ooh, yeah, so... that probably felt really bad.
But he said, bad. I love when he's like, yeah, Vince no-sold it. He was like, okay, like, can you do commentary with me tonight?
No, I think that's kind of like lying a little bit because like there's been many reports, this that like Vince never got over the fact that like Randy left.
Well, I could see him no-selling it that day, but then when Raw was over, he probably lost his mind.
Yeah, because there's a lot of reports and people saying that Randy and him were like really close. But see, what do you think? Because you've seen a lot of the Raw from back in the day. Do you like the King and Vince McMahon? Are you a fan of Vince McMahon on commentary or no? I think he's okay. He's okay.
He's okay, but he's gotta. I mean, like, see, when he's with like the King, or he's with somebody like whether it's Heenan or somebody like that. If it's a good heel, then I'm like, okay, then I'm fine with it. But if it's like him and JR, two kind of baby faces, I'm like, I need like a heel to make fun of Vince McMahon.
Yeah,
like you said, he always made fun of him with the toupee, or there's stuff like that. So if the heel is like good balance to Vince, I don't mind him. But
Vince is like he knows everything. Like Stone Cold is saying, like he knew everything that was going on. So like he was excited about it. Yeah. It's like you and me, But the only thing he didn't know the names of the moves.
Oh,
so yeah. Like, oh, look at that big move! Oh, look at that big move!
Yeah. Oh, what a maneuver!
what a maneuver, yeah. I was like, yeah, like stuff like that. So he was never able to say like insecurity or like, hey, like, oh, the Tiger Bomb, Tiger Driver, like he knew everything, but at the same time he didn't know enough of everything. So, but like I think that the King starts like doing the commentary, and then he matches. He has his best partner into JR. These two guys, like for you especially, because for me when I was growing up, I actually didn't listen to them. When I was actually happening, like the Attitude Era, because actually I listen in Spanish. But for you, how did that mean to you, like JR and Jim Ross?
Well, they were. I mean, they were like peanut butter and jelly. They were like Juan and Jean Paul. They were just like so smooth. It was like that's just the two guys that were supposed to announce. And then of course the one thing I do want to say, I like how they talk about JR a lot, and they didn't leave him out because he's with AEW. It wasn't like, oh, so JR, okay, moving on. Like they did with the stroke. They're like, you had a stroke. It was a thing that happened. Okay, let's move on.
We won't touch upon that. Yeah, we will not get it away. Yeah.
But it was they didn't treat it like that. They talked about JR, and they were good just because of the commentary, and that was like the height of JR's career. That was like the peak. And then like as you get into like the early mid 2000s, you start to go downhill. He's still good, but he starts to go downhill. That was like the point peak.
That like wardrobe malfunction, and now everybody's catching on that because he thinks that he's getting the blue chew, and he's just like all over that. Yes. But like you said, I feel that like even like what he says in the interview is really important though. He's like the JR and I were like superstars. So right now like the commentary is actually guys that like you don't really care for much. No. But at that time everybody was kind of like to make the other one better.
Yeah, who's the former wrestler on WWE's commentary? To me, Corey Graves doesn't count because he was bullshit in NXT and done. You have Samoa Joe, who was treated mediocre at best in WWE, and then you have Beth Phoenix, who was good, but that's on NXT.
And Nigel McGuinness, you will say, but like you said, in NXT. NXT is a separate entity because it's more Triple H and Shawn Michaels that they see the business way different the way that McMahon right now is actually seeing it. And I think that like that's what is lacking in.
But the one thing I do want to say though about commentary, the King did slip in there that he will be back after Clash of Champions. I think he said.
Oh, he said Payback. He said I'm gonna be back or something like that. So
yeah,
I don't know. Is that good? I don't know if that's bad. I mean, I think that he is still good.
To me, if you get rid of Byron Saxton and it's Samoa Joe, the King, and Phillips, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that if the King knows when to say things, because right now he's like it's three guys, so he needs to like kind of
and especially
what he says.
Yeah, now the product that they put on isn't like Attitude Era, but it's like especially if they let the King be a little bit more PG-13, because they supposedly in that era, then I think he'll be good. But when he tries to be like PG. And like kid friendly, it's bullshit.
And you're taking away from him.
Yeah, and I'm not saying he needs. And I don't want him to be like JR, where he's horny all the time. But like, he can at least make fun of a guy when he comes out or something.
Yeah, no.
Like if he's heel, be like, oh, look at this guy, like Ricochet, like, oh, can he even ride? Rides a roller coasters or something. I mean, obviously something a little bit more funny than that, but a dig like that.
Like make sure that like it's funny enough, but also not offending anybody. Because remember the thing with when he called like I said like the wood like something about like the Roman noodles or something.
Oh yeah.
And everybody was like really pissed off, and I also like forced him to like be off TV for a few weeks. But this is the King that I want to see, Jean Paul. Ada! See, he's like saying Ada because of Sabre's like boobs. Brock Lesnar is not gonna be happy about it. But see, that's the kind of King that like that's the King being himself.
Oh yeah.
That's even Stone Cold said that. He's like, I didn't know that voice was there. Because Bobby, like that high pitch. Right? Oh, I didn't know I had it. Oh my God, Bobby! You will see like he's pretty much horny all the time. Or you said like Michael Cole's the King. Have you seen this? Like no, I'm reading when the kid's like checking out.
Looking at the Playboy. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the kind of King that like made the Attitude Era better.
I love when they show on all the things, and like when they did like the bikini contest, they're showing all those clips, and then the King sitting there is so cold. He's like, "Oh God," he's almost like embarrassed of himself because he's on TV and he's all like,
Jacqueline is like pretty much twerking and showing the ass and all of that, and it's like, he goes, "Oh God," he's like, he probably feels embarrassed by it because he pretty much came out as like a guy that is horny all the time.
Yeah,
and a 24-hour horny man. But I mean, it made us like you said, like Stone Cold was saying, like the fans tell him, you're the voice of a generation. Oh, me, like kind of like that. I mean, I don't say it a lot though, and I'm not like Jim Ross though. But maybe if you want to call me like that, that's fine. Because when I see a chick like that, I go like,
Oh, well, I don't blame you.
I need it, But see, that was the days that like everybody tried to make the show better, though. See, the King with a commentary, even like this kind of segment's edgy. You want sex sells. Unfortunately, that's how the world works. You know what I mean? That's how it is. If you're like
it does, but the problem is they just cater to the very loud minority.
Yes. Yes. And I know about minorities, but we're not touching upon that. So let's talk about Jean Paul stuff now that like they didn't actually touch upon, and that is when the kind of like Stone Cold is like, "Are you okay since the stroke?" But they didn't say anything else besides that. Like they right there, we have a picture. Michael Cole completely going like this was all shoot, real life situation. He gets the stroke in the middle of the show. Fortunately, everybody in WWE, is a big company, so they have like all ambulances, like the medical personnel. They have everybody right there that is able to take care of like an emergency this big. So the King was actually really lucky because he gets this, but he's able to have like pretty much the best care possible, and he's able to survive this thanks to the help of the WWE staff. But they did not touch upon this. I actually got to see this live, and this is the kind of things that like we just wonder: is it legit or storyline? But Michael Cole was able to assure you that pretty much there was also like a thing of real life.
Yeah, there was that. Yeah, I mean, obviously there was that, and then if you want to bring up the other thing they didn't touch on, and then we'll kind of just talk about it both. But there was two major things in his life. It's like they just one they didn't even mention.
Upon, and that's his son, Ryan Christopher. For the ones that don't know or remember this, Ryan Christopher actually was a tag team champion. He happens to be part of one of like the greatest tag team champions and tag teams of the Attitude Era, and that's too cool with Scotty 2 Hotty because he was like the Grandmaster Sexy. So he happened to be the son of the King Lawler, but like I think they never got along. They never had a good relationship, and unfortunately, him 2 years ago he actually died. He died in jail. He was in jail and he actually died. Like, there were reports that like he got like a heart attack or like he actually choked himself. There was a lot of reports. Yeah. But they did not mention anything of this whatsoever. I think maybe because they don't want to bring negativity, and that's the main reason that they didn't do that. But I mean, I would have said, hey, he was a good wrestler. He brought a lot of joy to everybody because Too Cool, Scotty 2 Hotty, Rikishi, Grandmaster Sexy, they were one of the hottest things.
Yeah, they were over.
They were pretty much over.
Everybody tries to emulate. Otis, he's trying to emulate that.
Yeah, he's trying to emulate. Yeah, like you said, like the Caterpillar is pretty much the one. So that's why. And they didn't mention this, but like you said, the tone of the interview maybe didn't fit that type of topic because it was like a good mood.
Yeah, it was like funny. It was joking because it was like the Andy Kaufman thing. They was laughing at that, having fun. Then they go into the puppies and JR. Like it's all was fun stuff.
Then once again for you guys, and like see, they said they were original puppies, right?
Yeah, and with Billy Gunn came up with that.
Well, Road
Dog, excuse me. Yeah, and then the one thing I wanted to see, there's a lot I would ask, but it's very WWE scripted. Like we say, the King will say stuff like, "Oh, I wish I had a legit Mania match. I don't know why they waited so long." Blah blah blah. They try to make it feel like a shoot, but it's all a work. Because if I was, you want to ask legit questions, like Stone Cold would have been like, "Tell me about when Mick fell off the cell."
Yeah.
Because you didn't know that was going to happen. Because he said, because the King said Jim Ross was always like, "Oh man, is Vince, blowing up your headset?" And he's like, "I didn't hear nothing from him all day." Because he, the King, he didn't go to any meetings. He didn't want to know. He wanted to call it, legit. But Jim Ross was at all the meetings, so
more real. He said, "My reaction will be more real."
And then after hearing that, that's when you ask the question, "Oh, how was it when Mick Foley fell off the cell?" And you were like, "Oh God, he's dead." Like, did you legit think he was dead?
Yeah,
no, that would be cool questions to ask.
Owen Hart, that would have been, right there, like when they're talking, like he's about to, were you legit when like Mick fell off the chair of the cell? Yeah, it was good. I'm legit. Nothing happened. But no, I agree with you. I think that like if those kind of questions, that's the kind of question that everybody wants to hear. But like you said, WWE of course has to they probably give you like a set of topics, and that's all you can talk about.
Yeah. Now, if this was the Stone Cold podcast, then you'd hear it. But Broken Skull Sessions on the WWE Network, you're not going to.
It's like the PG version of the Stone Cold Broken Sessions podcast that he regularly does. So we didn't even touch upon like this. We got an exclusive picture from Roderick, and that's the King getting married to the cat. For the ones that don't know, the cat was actually a female wrestler, and she actually was a WWE Women's Champion. Right there, she made her debut alongside China. She came out with China, and that's how like they had the storyline. At some point, she broke off from China, and then she wins the Women's Championship, and then she lost it to Mae Young, or like the Moolah. Don't ask me why, Jean Paul. Those days, women's wrestling was not. If we complain about, like Riho and all of that,
like Nia Jax or somebody
we complain about those things. There was more to complain about, on those days. But see, like, they never even touch upon on this girl because, like, they had a rocky, pretty rocky relationship. Not really good, but, like, a lot of people know about this. Like, they were together for the longest time. And I think the King's girlfriend is also way younger than what he is right now. So he happens to have a taste for, like, younger women. And they didn't touch upon this. But, like, overall, I think the interview went out pretty well.
I thought it was good. And, like,
more than what I did before.
Yeah, they didn't bring up anything negative. So the tone of it was really good. It was really fun. It was lighthearted. And, because that's pretty much how the King's whole career has been, you could say. He had a legit career. It wasn't like, Ric Flair, like, oh, I almost died like 40 times. I was in a plane crash, or like stuff like that. No, the King's career was all pretty legit, I would say, besides the heart attack and then obviously the stuff with his son.
The one thing I did, I think that we should close on with this, Jean Paul, is like how he became the King. And this was because he went to this other guy, Barry Windman, something like that. He mentioned the name, and he said that like he was feuding with one of the wrestlers that actually helped him out to become a wrestler. He was the king of Memphis before.
Oh yeah. Then he cut that promo. He's like, if I beat you, I'll be the king of Memphis. And then like nobody, like they didn't think anything of it. But then he's like, oh, when I beat him, and I'm walking to the back, there was a bunch of kids, and they're all chanting, "You're the king now! You're the king now!" And then it kind of like, that was it. It kind of stuck, and then they took off.
Yeah, and also like remember what he said that like he found this wrestler with like the crown and also like a rope, and he said, "Oh, can I borrow this because it will look legit if I show up on TV the next day with like this? People will go nuts. It will go crazy. It will be the greatest thing in the world." He's like, "Yeah, sure. Take it. I'm going to go to Australia. When I come back, I'll take it back from you." And unfortunately, the guy didn't make it because on his plane to return to the States, he's actually crashed and he passed away. So he actually get the crown. So like also like another thing, like the reaction when the King first broke into the WWE. Remember, he said I was really big friends with Jimmy Hart. We were really close, but like they did something bad to the King because Jimmy Hart is like going to the locker room and he's like, "Oh no, don't get in there, don't get in.
Don't look at your crown."
And he's like, "Don't look at the crown." He's like, "Why?" Because like somebody took a dump in your crown. And he's like, "Oh, because there was, like I said, a lot of guys that went in the Memphis territory that like maybe they didn't have the greatest time there, or like they were, like I said, given their notice, they were fired because it says you had like a really short life, so to say, in any territory. Once your time was done, then you had to go somewhere else if you wanted to keep this as a career, And that he went to McMahon, complained, and nothing ever happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like you think of it today when we're like, oh, man, we're so sick of seeing Randy Orton or Drew McIntyre or, whoever. Imagine if they went to another territory and then you only saw them for like 2 months out of the year. Then those 2 months you'd be like, ee, and that's how it was. And so that's why, like you said, those guys couldn't overstay their welcome. Now, some guys, they wanted their stars. Like, Jerry was the king of Memphis. So that's why. But those guys who they kept rotating in, he probably would beat them, and they'd be like, so... Yeah. And then when he came in WWE, they're like, we'll get you now.
Yeah, it's a payback time. Absolutely right, Jean Paul. But like I said, overall, I think it was a pretty nice interview. And the King also, like he said, he's going to be doing story time now. He's going to be the voice of that. And also, like he says that, like, he's still going to commentate. Like you said, he's going to come back to the commentary booth in Monday Night Raw. Like I said, if he's able to just join and not be the center point, I think he will be okay. Because like right now with like Tom Phillips and Samoa Joe, I think he's okay. Byron Saxton is all right, but I think Samoa Joe is like the one that like breaks off out of like the three-man team.
Oh yeah.
We'll see what happens with the King Lawler, but it's nice to see that like he's in good health and also like now
he actually said he still wrestles on the indies and stuff.
Yeah,
so
he does because like and the guy he loves it. We gotta like also be thankful to a guy like that like he lived his dream, and because of him, like I said, professional wrestling guy, he kept evolving and growing. So the point right now, we get to see wrestling shows pretty much every single day of the week. That's why it never ends, it never stops, and that's why we have a video like this. Because, professional wrestling is at its peak. It doesn't matter. The ratings, I don't think they signified what, like, really professional wrestling does right now. And that's a topic for another video that we will do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Jean Paul discovers everything right here. So like,
Yes.
please find everybody. Where they can find us on the social media world.
Well, you can find us on Facebook under Rope Break, on Twitter, the OG Rope Break, Instagram, the original Rope Break, and right here for the best podcast in the YouTube wrestling community, the meat and the potatoes. Juan is eating it all up, and you should be too. The original Rope Break.
And don't forget that like tonight or Monday morning, we're just figuring it out, the schedule right here. We'll be talking about Monday Night Raw. A lot of things are going to happen, Jean Paul. More build-up for Randy Orton and Drew McIntyre. Raw Underground, we're waiting for that so bad. So there's a lot of like things happening.
10 p.m.
are going to be pissed off. There's just a lot of things are happening because of the ban from Twitch and all of that. Sasha Banks changed her the Twitch name for like Mercedes Motivation, but like Jean Paul said, in one of like his great calls, he said, well, Vince McMahon owns your legal name also. So there's a lot of battling to like see there. So it's not over yet. So it's just the beginning of that. So be here with us, family. So Jean Paul, you and me have one more thing that is left to say, and that is.